and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, President Trump soon arriving at the Knesset in Jerusalem. We did see pictures just moments ago where we understood that President Trump was in a car with the Prime Minister of Israel, of course, Mr. Netanyahu, as they then arrive at the Knesset. I think we're looking at live pictures of one of the corridors that leads into the main room of the Knesset. The U.S. president then set to address the Israeli parliament. I think we're getting a little bit of movement, of course, on that corridor. The latest is, as you know, extremely fluid. There you go. You see the Prime Minister of Israel arriving with Donald Trump. Donald Trump arriving in Israel as Hamas has freed 7 Israeli living hostages from the Gaza Strip in the wake of a U.S.-led truce. More hostages are then expected to be released later in the day. So President Trump's fragile peace deal, local media reports that 13 more have also been handed over, more hostages. Trump has arrived in Tel Aviv to herald the agreement ending the 2-year Israeli-Hamas war. Now, he's scheduled to address Israel Knesset and greet hostages at the parliament. So let's go live now to Bloomberg's Oliver Crook in Jerusalem. So, Ollie, what exactly is the latest on the hostages?
Yeah, so what we had earlier this morning was the IDF and the Israelis taking possession of those first 7 hostages, the first phase of that hostage release. That really was the deal that was brokered by the United States and by Donald Trump, more specifically, that has really been welcomed with adulation, joy and optimism, obviously across Israel, but also across the Palestinian territory in Gaza, starting on Friday when a ceasefire went into force. And the sort of for the first time in many, many months, hearing the sounds of gunfire and explosions, now ultimately culminating today with the final release of the living hostages. They count 20 in total, and we understand that will happen in very short order, and they will all be once again on Israeli territory. That will then, Francine, be followed by the release of a number of Palestinian prisoners that have been held by the Israelis, 1,700 of them that have been detained or taken since the attacks of October 7th, but of course also 250 of them that are serving life sentences in Israel for having committed various acts of terrorism. And this was probably one of the more bitter pills to swallow for the Israelis in this whole agreement. And you'll remember that Yahya Sinwar, the former leader of Hamas and really the architect of the October 7th attack, was one such prisoner back a long while back that had been kept by the Israelis, had been released in such a situation, and then was the author of this October 7th attack. So these are some of these sort of tensions and some of the difficulties that are running through what is otherwise a very sort of joyous day here in Israel and also over in the Gaza Strip, hopefully heralding the end of the war. We should say that you really feel it even before you arrive in Israel. As I was coming down in the plane to Tel Aviv just the other day, you could see a building lit up with the Israeli flag, the American flag, underneath it. Thank you. In that road that Donald Trump just took from Tel Aviv here to Jerusalem, it is a road that is usually lined with Israeli flags. Every third flag has been replaced from an Israeli flag to an American flag, which really shows, I think, the depth of gratitude, the depth of awe, and the depth of friendship that the Israelis feel towards Donald Trump as he arrives here. He was welcomed by Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, on the tarmac in Tel Aviv, and here heading over to the Knesset very soon to give a speech there to address the Knesset, which I believe is the first time a sitting American president has spoken to the Knesset since George W. Bush did back in 2008. So obviously a very momentous day here for the Israelis, for the Palestinians, and of course for Donald Trump, who's sort of validated his foreign policy attempts here. And it's very hard to imagine how anybody else could have really brought this to the table. His very unique style of foreign policy, one that is potentially less ideological, less principled, but willing to bring people to the table.
So we're looking at live pictures. We see, of course, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, flanked also by his wife, possibly waiting for the president. Do we know what President Trump will say at the Knesset?
Well, I think this will just be really a day to sort of mark the moment for Donald Trump and to mark the efforts of the last more than 2 years since this conflict erupted. He will be also meeting with a number of the hostage families, some of the hostages potentially that were released earlier as well. So that is going to be part of the agenda today. But I think for the Israelis and for Donald Trump, I mean, this is a moment that the Israelis have been waiting for such a long period of time. I think that for many that had despaired that anything could really happen, and then for kind of suddenly, almost out of the blue a couple of weeks ago. You had the beginnings of the form of this 20-point plan. It was presented and then finally being adopted by all of the parties here, bringing to bear pressure not just on Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to some of the more difficult aspects of it from the Israeli side, but also bringing Hamas to bear, the pressure to bear on Hamas, which was, involved the Qataris, it involved the Turks, it involved also the Egyptians. So bringing this all together for Donald Trump, really, he is the man of the moment. He is the most popular man in Israel, without a doubt. And just a couple of days ago in Hostage Square, you had speeches given by Steve Witkoff, by Jared Kushner, by Ivanka Trump. Every time Trump's name was mentioned in a crowd of hundreds of thousands of people, there were the chants, "Thank you, Trump. Thank you, Trump." And when Benjamin Netanyahu, we should say, his name was mentioned, it was booed very widely. So it was at a moment where the American president is the most popular politician, certainly in the world, as far as the Israelis are concerned.
Ollie, thanks so much. Oliver Crook there with the very latest, of course, from the ground. We also understand that the president then travels to Egypt for a signing ceremony in the Gaza plan. And, of course, as Ollie was saying, the ceasefire deal was really secured after days of these indirect negotiations brokered by the U.S., Egypt, Qatar and Turkey on the terms of the 20-point plan put forward by Donald Trump. Now, terminal subscribers can follow all of the latest developments from the Middle East on our T-Live blog. It's truly excellent, so I urge everyone to go and look at it. Now, Chinese exports rose 8.3% in September from a year earlier, the fastest pace in 6 months, giving Beijing a stronger hand in the latest trade war with the U.S. Meanwhile, President Trump has signaled openness to a deal with China. Well, Bloomberg's chief Asia correspondent, Rosalind Matheson, joins us now. Ros, thank you so much for being here. So Chinese exports rose to their biggest monthly total so far this year. How much leverage does that give the U.S.?
Well, it gives leverage to China, arguably, because they've been diversifying their exports in the run-up to these trade tensions, but arguably for years. And what's that showing up is they're selling more stuff just to other parts of the world. Obviously, they do rely on the US, but, there is an issue here around leverage.
Roz, I'm just going to also mention to everyone watching at home or from the office that we do see there the arrival of Donald Trump, just being greeted by the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. President Donald Trump arrived in Israel a short while ago. He then addresses the parliament. I mean, the current state is that Hamas has freed 7 Israeli living hostages from the Gaza Strip in the wake of this U.S.-led truce deal. More hostages, we understand, are expected to be released later in the day, and Israel is slated to release almost 2,000 jailed Palestinians and boost aid to Gaza. Now, there is a live blog, of course, put together by our wonderful team on the ground and here in London. Unlike, we understand, previous swaps, these hostage releases are actually being conducted away from public view, with Hamas eschewing some of the pageantry and triumphalism that has been condemned by Israel and others as exploitative. So you can see President Trump there signing, of course, the book, being flanked by the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and his wife. For Israeli authorities, actually, on the hostage and the prisoner swap, this discretion also provides more time to assess the ex-hostages' physical but also emotional condition before they rejoin society. Now, look, the latest, let's listen in if there's any words spoken, and then we're expecting the President Trump, to talk to the Knesset in a short while.
Amen to that. Yep. We'll be here and then everyone should fall back.
Perfect.
Amen to that, Mr. President. Thank you. Thank you very much. Move this way. I have one move. Thank you. You're all good. You're calm. Cameras. Is that the first lady?
Daniel. White House count.
President Trump, of course, filled with emotion, that room just moments ago as he arrived then in Israel. He also expressed confidence that the ceasefire in Gaza will hold. Let's get back to Roz Matheson. But Roz, I wanted just to pause a second before we get back to China. I mean, this is a hugely emotional moment for many families, but everyone, of course, watching this. What happens next?
Well, obviously, he's going to address the parliament, but then he goes on to Egypt, and we have a meeting there involving a whole lot of countries around the world. And this is about also bedding down the longer part of this deal. I mean, the hostage release today is hugely important for Israel. The Palestinian prisoners being released, also, that's something that's been negotiated and stalled for many, many months. But after that comes the really hard work, which is what does Gaza look like after this conflict? For a start, Israeli troops have been pulling back. We've seen that start to work, the ceasefire begin. But what are the longer-term arrangements around that? And particularly, what are the longer-term arrangements around the governance of Gaza? I mean, there are some parameters there that Benjamin Netanyahu says are his red lines in terms of the disarmament of Hamas. Doesn't really want the role of the PA in Gaza in the longer term, but what is the role of the Palestinians in Gaza going forward? And then beyond that, even in the longer term, what does it mean for the Middle East? Because, of course, this war has caused tensions across the Middle East, including with Iran. And Saudi Arabia has kind of pulled back from thinking about joining the Abraham Accords, which is really what Donald Trump wants in the longer term, this idea of trade and investment business across this region, and saying, for them, a part of that's going to have to be talk about a Palestinian state. So you've got a lot of complexities here that are going to go on in the longer term. And so we've got this agreement now. It is a big moment, of course, for Israel and certainly also for Donald Trump. There's a lot of hard work to come.
Yeah, Roz, I mean, going back to China, Donald Trump is, of course, seen now as someone that can broker peace deals, that has done for a lot of people the unthinkable. What does it mean for his relationship with China?
Well, it's interesting because in the immediate term, he's saying that he might, in Egypt, start to come in on the tensions we're seeing now between Pakistan and Afghanistan on their border. There have been deadly clashes there. And then, as you say, really for him, a key relationship is the one with Xi Jinping. And what is the China-US relationship that goes forward? I mean, possibly, are they going to meet still at the end of the month? Are they not? Is this all negotiating tactics and positioning that's going on? It's a very delicate dance. If so, because there are lots of threats flying, and each country does have that leverage, as we're talking about economically, China trying to diversify. The US does have some levers to pull with China at the same time. But will it come down to that personal relationship that you see between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump?
Let's also get into the conversation. Kallum Pickering, chief economist at Peel Hunt. Kallum, of course, we're looking at everything that's happening in Jerusalem with President Trump actually addressing the Knesset in a short while. But again, it gives him a little bit of a leverage, possibly towards other world leaders. When you look at, from an economic point of view, the U.S.-China trade truce, can we get a truce, or actually is everything up in the air again?
I'm not sure everything's up in the air again. I think there's a lot to take just from the market reaction. This is in a sense not a new direction that the relationship is taking. There's a long-term escalation taking place between the US and China. This is the big rivalry in the world. It goes at different speeds. And so I see this as basically an acceleration in a longer game. At some point, they'll hit the brakes. They'll probably reverse a little. What I would just highlight is that the pattern that we've seen in President Trump's second term so far on trade, notably with China, is a big escalation, but then only a partial rollback. And so I think it's unlikely that we end up with a total US tariff of, say, 160%, which is the current 60% tariff plus the 100 that is threatened. But I wouldn't be surprised if the end result is a tariff that's higher than the 60% that is currently imposed on Chinese imports.
I mean, are there clear evidence, actually, that a lot of countries around the world are trying to de-dollarize? And is gold just the effect of that?
I think there's two aspects to this, which is the rise in the gold price is telling you something fundamental about the way that people view the dollar as the ultimate safe haven, and I think this is a marginal effect at the moment. I think this need not be confused with the depreciation in the dollar which is taking place, which is something that's happened in the past before, twice actually in the past 40 years, and tends to be consistent with US markets eventually becoming too expensive relative to other markets and money flowing elsewhere. And so what the dollar weakening is really picking up on is portfolio reallocation, less so the ultimate view on the state of the dollar.
But, Kallum, just to be clear, I mean, do you think dollar weakness has been engineered by the Trump administration? This feels like it's maybe what they wanted.
I think it is, but I think it's totally misguided, actually, in a funny way, because in the end, the US benefits from the strong dollar more than it costs the US. Like, this is the privilege of the reserve currency. You can run trade deficits as far as the eye can see. Countries always have to buy your debt. You get lots of advantages. The weakening of the dollar, for me, is almost it's a short-sighted idea that if you could just weaken the dollar, you'd be more price competitive on global markets, and that would resolve the trade balance. My best bet is actually this will be a temporary phenomenon that will not outlive Donald Trump, whereas the US-China, that will be the thing that outlives the Trump administration.
Roz, what do we know so far about a possible meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi?
Well, we've had all this conversation. They talk about it happening, but they've not completely committed. And that's, again, part of this gambit of leaving negotiating tactics to the last minute, because each of them has a lot to gain and each has a lot to lose. So Xi Jinping will want to go into this meeting knowing he's going to get something tangible out of it. And maybe that rests, again, on that personal rapport they seem to have. I mean, Donald Trump, again, calling him an exceptional sort of leader, effectively, highly respected leader. So there is that personal aspect to this. And does it come down to them getting in a room and somehow coming out with an agreement to extend the truce? But there's a lot of risk there for each of them in doing so.
Rose, thank you so much. And Kallum, when you look at, I guess, the world markets, there's a clear move away from tariff concerns.
Yep.
Is it complacency, or actually are they focusing on other things?
Well, the thing is with tariffs, actually, these are essentially price effects, and price effects you can adjust to. And so the world is highly dynamic. We have seen consistently over the last 10 years big shocks produce less bad economic circumstances than we had anticipated. So these dynamic trade flows make some adjustments. I think the biggest story, actually, we see this a little bit today, but the two big geopolitical events which have held back global momentum for a while, which is the Middle East and, of course, Russia-Ukraine. Yeah. What typically happens is when you get resolutions on these issues, you then release a lot of economic energy, and this tends to have a positive effect. Let's see what happens in markets over the next few weeks as we try to understand what's happening in the Middle East.
So this is not only through the energy aspect. It's basically could be unleashing some feel-good animal spirits.
That's right. Well, a good example of this would be the end of the Cold War released an enormous amount of human capital and human potential on the world stage. Right? Of course, these are smaller effects, but it's always the same pattern where confidence to invest, the ability to extract resources from the ground. I mean, the Middle East is a highly resource-rich part of the world. You have key shipping routes, which save you an awful lot of time. There's going all the way around Africa all the time with boats. Like, this stuff really, really matters. And so when you start removing all of these tail risks, you're combining multiple effects, which in the end can actually amount to a lot. What we're seeing with markets is not these sudden pricing in of risk and then sudden taking out, but much more gradual effects because the world is so complicated. And so I think what we'll probably see is in key commodity prices, in things like shipping prices, things just start to move in a better direction over coming.
Kallum, let's also go back to Israel. President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu arrived at the Knesset in Jerusalem before addressing Parliament. President Trump also signed a book and wrote, "This is my great honor, a great and beautiful day, a new beginning." He showed his message to reporters and camera camera presence. Now, our international affairs columnist, Mark Champion from Bloomberg Opinion, also joins us now. Mark, you wrote a beautiful piece actually on Friday that basically talked about a breakthrough. Could this be lasting peace?
Well, it could be, but the point is that there's, these kinds of things. You have a ceasefire, initial deals. Often it's exchange of prisoners. In this case, it's exchange of hostages and prisoners. But then the really hard work begins towards a political settlement, which is a completely different thing. And Gaza is an extraordinarily complicated case because you don't really have a status quo ante that you want to go back to. You want to remove Hamas. Yeah. You want to, really change the situation. What hasn't altered is the fact that there's no real agreement on the two sides as to what direction of travel to take, and that will be, require. My point in the column was really it just will take a lot of stick-to-itness, a lot of patience in order to get through this kind of thing. It's enormously difficult. It's something that's been going on for decades. So yes, it's a breakthrough. It's tremendously important, for the hostages, and their families, also for Gaza, which has been, a place of real horror for the last, 2 years. So immensely important, but, the underlying difficulties haven't removed, and it's going to be tough to get through it.
Yeah, and Mark, again, you say about the challenges that need to be addressed, which is the disarmament of Hamas, but also the withdrawal of the Israeli Defense Forces. When do we start having those conversations?
It's going to have to happen soon. And the sequencing is always the hard part here. Hamas will not want to start giving over its weapons to the IDF. Not going to happen. The IDF will not want to move until it's clear that Hamas is being disarmed. Then the question arises, well, who's going to do that? The idea in Trump's 20-point plan is that it's going to be some international Arab-led force that would come in and do it. What will the Arab leaders want in exchange for this very difficult task? Pretty thankless, to be honest. Whether he can get Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to the kinds of things that the Arab states will want in order for that, for that to happen, start spending money to send their own people there to risk their lives. These are really, really tough questions.
Mark, again, we know that the ceasefire deal was secured after a lot of these indirect negotiations with, the U.S., Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey. Is it those four countries that will play a big role in what comes after?
They are critical, and then also Saudi, obviously, which is where the money is, and it's the largest player, in the Arab side of that group. But what's really, I think, what makes this deal different and more promising than the other ones is that you do have both, Turkey and Qatar, who are, very crudely, quite supportive of the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is an offshoot, a violent one, but it is an offshoot. And then you have the Saudis, the Egyptians, Jordanians, and so on, all of whom are, very much in a state of enmity with the Muslim Brotherhood. And these groups have, and there's been a lot of tension in the Gulf and in the region between them over the last, years. The fact that they've come together, that they've, put their weight behind this deal, that's really what's made it possible, I think, that with Trump on the other side, putting pressure on Netanyahu. That's all great, but it's still going to be very hard.
Do we know what kind of pressure actually President Trump put on Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Well, I mean, we don't know, although we weren't in the room, but it's pretty clear that he said that, we need this to get done. And the fact, I think, that, that they... What was really interesting here was that, you moved from a plan, the Riviera plan, if you like, that essentially was like a dream for the right in the Israeli cabinet. And then you moved to this plan, which, former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair was sort of involved in constructing, that these other Arab countries were involved in constructing. And this one, is, explicitly removes the idea that there might be some form of ethnic cleansing where Palestinians are pushed out, you get redevelopment and all that sort of thing. It's very clear that this is going to be a Palestinian reconstruction project, and that was a big move, and Trump, without Trump's pressure, I can't see how we would have moved back to that situation. It was, of course, Trump's plan that moved us away from an expectation that the Palestinians would stay and that there would be redevelopment and a new settlement for them. And so we're still in a rather vague place, which is, again, why I say I think we've got quite a long way to go.
Mark, something that struck with me, I mean, you basically talk about two main reasons why this could be, less of a blip in the fighting than previous ones. One is maybe, what Trump has asked of Netanyahu, because it's becoming hard for him to do anything in the Middle East. The second one, which I thought was extremely interesting, was that, you say for at least a measure of hope is that both Hamas and Netanyahu's rule over populations that are sick of them. What do we know about Netanyahu's popularity? Well,
Netanyahu is not popular. So when Steve Witkoff was in Israel, I think it was yesterday this happened. But basically, it was with a crowd with the hostages. Trump's very popular. There was a lot of cheering for them, and when he mentioned Netanyahu, there was boos. Right, so Trump is more popular in Israel than Netanyahu is, and Netanyahu remains a very divisive figure. There are elections that are coming in about a year now. He's preparing for that. They're all preparing for it. So, yeah, it's a tricky one for him.
Okay, Mark, we also we have some breaking news from the IDF saying that the Red Cross has received 13 remaining life hostages. So let's get back to Jumana Bersecci, of course, who's with us in the region. Kallum, thank you for joining us. I think we'll come back to a lot of the economics things a little bit later on. Jumana, when you look at, what do we know about the hostages? We know that 7 have been freed from the Gaza Strip in the wake of this deal, and then the IDF is saying that 13 remaining life hostages have also been received.
That's right, Francine. So in the early hours of this morning, Hamas published a list of 20 of the hostages that were going to be released in the coming hours. The first batch was released a couple of hours ago. 7 of them were transferred to the Red Cross, to the Red Crescent. That was confirmed by the IDF. And then a short while ago, the last 13 were also transferred to the Red Crescent, and that is now just been confirmed by the IDF. But also, it should be mentioned that in total, there were 48 hostages. 28 of them will not be returning alive. And the latest reporting suggests that the bodies of those deceased will be handed back in the coming hours and coming days as well. But 20 of them now have been released. They are making their way to Israel, and what is a remarkable turn of events, Francine. And early on in the day, we were showing images of the hundreds of thousands of people gathered in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. They'd been anticipating this moment. The families of the hostages, some footage released earlier of one of the hostages FaceTiming, a video recording with his mother for the first time in 2 years, a really poignant moment. But it also should be said, in Gaza as well, in Khan Yunis, there are throngs of people waiting to receive the up to 2,000 Palestinian prisoners and detainees who also in turn have been released today. That was one of the perhaps more controversial topics that was being negotiated last week in Sharm el-Sheikh, exactly who was going to be on that list, because about 250 of the Palestinian prisoners, out of them, some of them had been serving life sentences, and the Palestinian side had been pushing for the release of perhaps some more controversial figures that were non-starters to the Israeli side. So that was one of the last sticking points of the negotiations that took place. But indeed, that exchange of the hostages for the prisoners has now taken place. There is a ceasefire underway. President Trump is clearly in the region. He's receiving a hero's welcome. And I think it was pretty telling what he wrote on the guest book of the Knesset. He's framing this as an opportunity for a new beginning, a new day. He's saying that it is his great honor and it is a great and beautiful day, ushering in perhaps a new era for this region. But of course, Francine, as you were just discussing, this is just early innings. And today is a remarkable day, a sentimental day, a day of huge emotion, both in terms of what is been gained back, but also a look back in terms of what has been lost. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have started the return journey back home, only to find that they have no homes to live in. About 90% of the Gaza Strip is uninhabitable. There is a huge need for humanitarian aid, and even though aid trucks have started coming through over the course of the weekend, again, lots of footage of those trucks being stampeded by hungry Palestinians. Earlier today, the French President Macron, who just landed in Egypt for the Gaza summit, was saying there also needs to be a humanitarian gathering. And so before we can say that this is the beginning of a new era, I think some immediate questions need to be solved. And that's not even addressing some of the longer term questions about governance and where the reconstruction funds are going to be coming from.
Julien, I will get back to you in just a second. Let's also bring in Julien Barnes-Dacey, Director of the Middle East and North Africa Program at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Julien, thank you for joining us. I mean, this is a huge day, as one that actually many families have been waiting for a long time. Israel and Hamas reaching the ceasefire deal. Is this long-lasting peace, or at least real peace?
I think it's obviously a very welcome first start. And as you say, it's both a ceasefire on the ground for the desperate population of Gaza and the release of these hostages. But we have a long, long way to go to see this both implemented and real peace come to Gaza, to Israel-Palestine and the broader region. There are immense hurdles, there are immense challenges ahead. And I think one should not really walk away or shy from the fact that it's going to take an immense amount of work, huge political pressure and investment to deliver something that's sustainable here and that delivers mutual rights and security for both Israelis and Palestinians.
Julien, what happens next? I don't know what you're expecting from Egypt, but we were also having a conversation with our Mark champion in saying, look, it's the day after that people will wonder who's in charge, how you de-arm Hamas and how you get IDF out of Gaza.
I think that's exactly right. There's a huge question mark about internal dynamics in Gaza right now. We already see Hamas coming back out in terms of trying to reassert its internal security control. There are obviously immense economic reconstruction needs. And we shouldn't forget that Israel continues to occupy, frankly, most of Gaza, including all of its valuable agricultural land, or at least most of it. So how you move towards a scenario where the Gazan population can go back, can make their lives livable, where Hamas is actually removed as a actor on the ground in terms of security control, where you see a return of Palestinian governance, where you see the steps necessary for Israel to move to a full withdrawal. These are all question marks hanging over it. And we shouldn't forget that the minute that this deal was approved, Netanyahu effectively came out and said, look, we'll do phase one, but we're not going to withdraw from Gaza and we're not going to implement it fully. So I don't think anyone should be under any illusions that there isn't a kind of a mutual commitment here to making this work. Both sides are likely to oppose the next steps that are needed to lock this down towards something more meaningful.
So, Jumana, what are you expecting in terms of the leaders from the region that will get involved in this, that have sway and that will be listened to?
Well, Francine, this is a momentous day, and we're awaiting now for Trump to deliver his speech at the Knesset. But after that speech, he's going to make his way over to Egypt, to Sharm el-Sheikh, which was the site of those discussions last week, alongside many of the most senior figures from the Arab region and from around the world. You've got senior representation from Qatar, from Egypt, of course, President Sisi, from Turkey, and from Europe. You've got President Macron and the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who are all going to be there as well. And I should say that the praise that's being heaped upon President Trump isn't exclusive to Israel. It's also coming from Arab states, too. Notably, earlier this morning, the Egyptian President Sisi announced that they're going to be awarding Trump with the Order of the Nile. That is the highest state honor that can be given, and they will be awarding him with that once he gets to Sharm el-Sheikh later this afternoon. And it's really just a reflection and underscores how much of a vital role the Arab countries played in bringing about this endgame as well, and this outcome. And you don't need to go that far back, but a couple of weeks ago on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, President Trump did have a meeting with all of these Arab leaders, And it was a couple of days afterwards that the 20-point Gaza peace plan was released. And so you do have buy-in, you do have involvement from these Arab countries, which perhaps gives us some hope that maybe the focus will stay on implementing the next phase of the plan. This is just phase one. This is a ceasefire. It is the release of hostages, something that no prior president was able to achieve despite multiple rounds of negotiations in exchange for those prisoners. But again, as we highlighted earlier, early phases of the rest of those points in the 20-point peace plan. And of focus is going to be for all of these leaders later today, providing much needed humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians, the huge reconstruction task ahead. The latest estimate by the World Bank, and this was put out in February of this year, so many months ago, was that the total costs are $57 billion. You can imagine since then, the reconstruction costs have got even bigger. Where is that money going to come from? Who is going to fund it? Then, of course, the questions about governance. In the 20-point peace plan, they talk about an apolitical Palestinian technocratic government being set up. What does that mean exactly? Who does that entail? One final thing that I'll leave you with, Francine, is originally the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas didn't seem to have been invited to the Sharm el-Sheikh Egyptian summit later this afternoon, but this morning reporting suggests that he actually will be there, which indicates that there is an understanding from Arab leaders that you can't simply have external forces decide the future of Palestinians, be it on the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip. You need to bring along Palestinians with you. In what shape, what format, what happens to Hamas? Again, questions for the future.
Jemana, thank you. We can also bring you some live pictures from Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, Gaza, where people are waiting for the released Palestinian prisoners to arrive. And I guess, Mark, the question, which you also allude to in your piece, is, are there any guarantees that Benjamin Netanyahu does not go back to restarting hostilities as soon as the hostages are released?
No, and again, this is where, frankly, so much will depend on President Trump and his, sort of attention span, which isn't something he's really famous for. But if he will need to really stay stuck into this. I think the other, thing I didn't mention, which is, gives some reason for hope, is if you think of why this happened, essentially the trigger point was when Israel bombed Qatar. And they were trying to, kill the Hamas leaders who were there at the time discussing a Trump peace plan. So that seems really to have changed, the dynamic in the White House where Trump has understood, I think, that unlike in his first term, keeping the interests of the Arab states, the interests of Israel are not aligned. And on the Palestinian question, he initially was, really just sort of sided with Israel and Netanyahu, and now we see that he's sort of given that up, and he has brought the Arab states very much into the tent. And if that remains the dynamic, then you can see the pressure required. Just like with Mahmoud Abbas coming to Sharm el-Sheikh, the Arab states have been consistent in saying there has to be the Palestinian Authority has been involved in the rule of Gaza after Hamas leaves. They're the only available Palestinian option, and so they have to be there. And Netanyahu has been very clear, they can't be. This is what I think we're likely to see, this kind of tug of war, and it will be, the mediator will be Trump.
Julien, what's your take on this? So if the mediator is Donald Trump, will he stay focused on this to make sure that both sides actually respect what they've agreed on?
Really hangs on whether Trump will stay engaged and whether he's prepared to put the pressure on Israel in particular to deliver on its commitments to phase 2 and 3 and moving forward. I think the sense is that the Arab states are responsible for delivering on Hamas and the Arab side, and Trump is responsible for delivering on Israel. And I think the plan is to try and ensure that Trump's legacy is in a sense tied to this. I think that's one of the reasons why you've seen this great welcoming of the initiative by the Arab states, why they're giving him this award in Egypt. They want Trump to really buy into this. They want him to tie his own legacy to the success of this deal. He obviously hasn't succeeded in Ukraine, and this will be a great breakthrough for him if it can hold. And if it collapses, that will be also on him. So I think the idea is that he now is the one that has to say to Netanyahu, look, this is a deal that's here to stay. You have to deliver phase 2 and phase 3 of it, and there's no way around that. And I think we've seen from what's happened over recent weeks that Trump is the only person, that the US is the only country that can actually force the Israelis to deliver here, to stay aligned with the plan. So the Arab states and others do actually have a lot of concern with some dimensions of the plan. They are not fully bought into some of the international oversight. They are not entirely happy with the changes that Netanyahu put into the plan at the last stage in terms of how and when the Israeli army will withdraw. But they are deciding to lean in to support the plan in the hope that actually by doing that they can get Trump to deliver on Israel moving forward.
Julien, is Benjamin Netanyahu only popular as long as there's a war? And how does that change the dynamics?
Well, no, I don't think that's the case. I think that he is politically viable at home if there is a war because his right-wing coalition has aligned itself with that war. But we've seen in opinion poll after opinion poll that the Israeli population want the war to end, that they wanted the return of hostages. They will now they are now crediting Trump with that move. We saw in some of the recent public protests and demonstration in Israel that Netanyahu was actually booed when US representatives referred to him. This is seen as something that President Trump, rather than Prime Minister Netanyahu, has delivered. The question is, will Netanyahu see his political future being tied now to the successful implementation of this deal, or will he try to maneuver and collapse the deal as a way to try and hold his right-wing coalition together? We don't really know. And I think there is a tension in Israeli society right now. Clearly they wanted an end to the war. Clearly they wanted the return of the hostages. But we really don't see or really don't know at the moment the extent to which they want a full withdrawal from Gaza, that they are prepared to enter into a wider negotiating process. And these are the kind of things that the Arab states are going to be pushing Trump to advance now in terms of the next stages.
Julien, let's also go back to Oliver Crook, who's on the ground for us. Ollie, just about 12 minutes ago, the IDF has said the Red Cross has received 13 remaining live hostages. What more do we know?
That really marks the end of basically Hamas having custody of any Israeli living hostages. That phase of this war, the phase of this battle that began on October 7th, more than 2 years ago, is now, as of this moment, officially over. What will happen now is those last 13 remaining hostages will be transferred to IDF custody within the Gaza Strip. They will then be taken out of the Gaza Strip into Israeli territory, where they will receive medical attention and then ultimately be reunited with their family. That leaves the remains of a great number of many more hostages that will still remain within the Gaza Strip. There has been a timeline for that has been established that will be much, much longer. The reality of the situation is they don't know where all of these remains are. But this really marks not just the end and the return of this really sort of dark chapter for the Israelis, but this also marks the end of Hamas in a certain way giving up one of the sort of last bargaining chips that they had within this conflict. And this really opens the conversation for the sort of next phases of what we're going to see next out of this conflict. And again, we've had this conversation throughout the morning, and I think there's a very simple question which illuminates a very complicated answer, which is this war over? In the mind of President Donald Trump, the answer is yes. It is unequivocal. The war is over. Now we must move towards peace. Benjamin Netanyahu, if you ask him, it's not necessarily the same story. Much of the commentary within Israel is very much the same. You talk to a number of people. For them, this is, a ceasefire, a significant ceasefire that could potentially lead to something, but maybe nothing more than a ceasefire. And that will ultimately come down to the role of Hamas, what Hamas is going to be willing to do in the coming weeks and months, if they're willing to disarm, put their arms down. And there's been some of the provisions within this 20-point plan that any Hamas operative that really wants to disarm, they will be given amnesty, they will be given safe passage, and all of those sorts of things. But these are the major questions that before we get into any kind of security apparatus within Gaza, any kind of technocratic government structure, any kind of ultimate long-term pathway to statehood will have to be answered, and those will have to be answered by the operatives in Hamas, which we understand have reasserted their control within Gaza over the last couple of days, and really have also been punishing retribution on many Palestinians who are said to have been working and collaborating with the IDF. But right now, we're just sort of moments away here in the Knesset, waiting really for Donald Trump to sort of mark this moment and awaiting for those final hostages, that the 13 of them, to be transferred from the Red Cross to the IDF and ultimately repatriated to Israel.
Ali, we're just getting confirmation that from the Israeli military that it's received 13 hostages. We're also looking at live pictures of the Knesset. Hugely emotional day for many people. Of course, there, I think I spotted a couple of MAGA hats also amongst those watching. How's this playing out domestically?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that this moment, it cannot be sort of overstated how massive a moment this is for Donald Trump and for Israel. I mean, even when Trump was elected in the early days when I was here back in January when we were talking about the ceasefire, which before even Trump was president of the United States, many Israelis gave credit not to Joe Biden, despite the fact that he was still technically president, but to Donald Trump. And all of their views, their intensely positive views of the current president of the United States in anticipation of his election, have been frankly fully gratified, I think, in the mind of the Israelis. I mean, when I flew in just a couple of days ago, as you're landing, you look out the window, you see a skyscraper that has an Israeli flag, an American flag on it, and beneath it, it says thank you. And when you take the road that the Beast just did, the cars that carried the president, and carrying from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. These are roads that are lined with Israeli flags. They were replaced on Friday, one in every 3 flags, with an American flag to try to just sort of illustrate the awe and gratitude that the Israeli people have for the President of the United States. And we should say, speaking just a few days ago, Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump, Steve Witkoff in Hostage Square before literally hundreds of thousands of people, every time Trump's name came up, the crowd would start cheering, "Thank you, Trump, thank you, Trump." When Benjamin Netanyahu's name came up, there was really very audible, very loud booing. So that gives you sort of the impression of what the Israelis feel about Donald Trump right now, who's really being seen as a national savior.
Thank you, Ali. Let's go back to Julien. Julien, Barnes-Dacey, when you look at exactly what's going on in Israel right now, we're looking again at live pictures of the Knesset. What tone do you think President Trump will take?
Well, knowing Trump, I think this is going to be a very celebratory address praising his own achievements. And I think that he will be being very loud in emphasizing that he was the only president that could and did deliver this announcement. I don't think this is going to be a speech that goes into the weeds of the implementation of phases 2 and 3 of the deal. I don't think this is going to be a speech that actually squeezes the Israelis to do things they don't want to do. This is a moment where Trump does not want to infuse any doubt into the situation. He wants to declare the war over. He wants to declare that happening because he delivered it, and he wants to take the acclaim from within Israel and globally for that achievement.
Julien, thanks so much. Julien Barnes-Dacey there from the European Council on Foreign Relations. Now let's go back to Jumana Brasecci, who's with us, of course, in the region. Jumana, I mean, one of the things that Mark wrote extensively in his piece is also the fact that there's a long road back to coexistence between Israel and its Palestinian neighbors, let alone peace. What do we know about the devastation of Gaza?
Yeah, and that is perhaps the number one question, Francine, and not just the weeks, but the months, years to follow, and whether there can be a viable potential future Palestinian state. It wasn't explicitly referenced in the 20-point plan, but there is a line about creating a pathway towards a potential Palestinian state. Of immediate concern, though, right now, I would say, is the scale of the humanitarian assistance. And since the beginning of the war, about 460 deaths can be attributed to famine per the UN. And the UN have said that they are on standby to start delivering aid. The issue is not the availability of aid, but actually getting the aid to the people that need it. And so the next couple of days, you are going to see a massive focus from the international community, the likes of President Macron, saying that there needs to be a gathering to discuss that particular point, humanitarian assistance, and also how it's going to be administered. One of the perhaps more controversial crossings is the Rafah crossings. The Italian foreign minister says that they're moving towards opening it in the next 24 hours to ensure that that aid does go unhindered and not blocked as it starts heading towards the Gaza Gaza enclave where it is much needed. And the UN also say that they're sitting ready to distribute about 180,000 tons of supplies, medical supplies, food, also water, and then access to shelter and safe homes for many of those Palestinians who are returning to their homes to find that they no longer exist. The latest estimates point to about 90% of the Gaza Strip being uninhabitable. So these are, again, huge questions, and it's difficult to foresee a future and a long-lasting peace unless you have the conditions on the ground that allow for the Palestinians to eat and get access to the humanitarian assistance that is much, much needed. At the same time, I think one of the other big questions is what exactly happens to Hamas. There were reports over the weekend that Hamas security officials were patrolling various parts of Gaza and exacting retribution on Palestinians who they think were allying themselves too closely with the Israeli forces. So all of that is happening in the background. Hamas officials have said that they're willing to accept that they may not have a role in the future governance of Gaza, but at the same time, there has been resistance to put down their arms so long as IDF still control more than 50% of the Gaza enclave. So we're still at a point where there's a lot of daylight between the two sides. And I think this is going to be the big challenge for President Trump, for the Arab leaders, for the international community to break through that stalemate and get to a position that actually is acceptable for both and one that promotes security in the region, regional security, and one where ultimately these two peoples can actually work together towards living side by side.
Thank you, Jemana. We are just getting some breaking news. Egypt now saying that the Saudi foreign minister will also participate in the Gaza sighting. So let's get back to Mark Champion, our international affairs columnist. Mark, when you look at, it just makes me think who will pay for the reconstruction and what kind of reconstruction are we looking at? Is it too soon to ask that today?
No, I think these are the questions that are going to have to be addressed very quickly, not because the reconstruction is going to happen very soon, but because in order to, really what has to happen is you have to fill the vacuum that will emerge as the IDF pulls out, and you have this, appalling situation left for 2 million Palestinians. There's a vacuum, and you already see Hamas refilling it. And if you want to, have success here, you have to be very active and fill that vacuum. Yeah. It's not just about aid, enormous amounts of aid in, aid workers in, get journalists in, independent journalists in, you need to fill the vacuum. You need to start building, laying out how this is going to work, start building structures, towards it. And, obviously the reconstruction is going to be a big part of it. You have to get the Palestinian population to buy in and to accept that Hamas is not a part of the future. Hamas is the problem that is getting solved.
Yeah, but the Palestinian Authority is not that popular, actually.
Not at all.
In Gaza. So you would need the emergence maybe of someone else.
You need, yes, and you need something in between. You need some temporary structure which is going to be probably international, which will have to, but this has been done before. It's not the first time. This was done in Kosovo. This was done in northeastern Croatia. At the end of the war, you had this very, very heavily armed UN force, US-led, with a multinational force, and it moved in and disarmed Serbian troops who, and fighters, and they had thousands of tanks and all kinds of weaponry. It can be done. It's just incredibly difficult.
Yeah. But, Mark, just a couple of weeks ago, the UK recognized the Palestinian statehood. What's Israel's position on this? Are we going to have a two-state solution?
I think that's a long way off. And at the moment, this Israeli government is absolutely dead set against it and, cannot. It's constitution. I don't mean legally constitutionally, but it is structured in such a way, dependent on several parties that are in their DNA. Their whole purpose for being is to prevent that from happening. They are basically in favor of a greater Israel, so that is going to be very hard. But this is going to be a longer process, and that government won't be in charge forever.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark Champion there from Bloomberg Opinion. Thank you also to Jomana Bersecci with us, of course, on the ground. Hamas has freed all remaining living Israeli hostages being held in the Gaza Strip. Now, you're also watching live pictures from the Knesset in Jerusalem, where President Trump is set to speak shortly. Now, Israel is slated to release almost 2,000 jailed Palestinians and boost aid to Gaza. President Donald Trump, of course, in Israel, where he will address the parliament very, very shortly. He then travels to Egypt for a signing ceremony on the Gaza plan. The ceasefire deal was secured after days of indirect negotiations were brokered by the U.S., Egypt, Qatar and Turkey on the terms of a 20-point plan put forward by Trump. We only found out minutes ago that the Saudi foreign minister will also participate in this Gaza signing. Now, as we await for Trump to address the Knesset, it's hard to overstate how much praise he's getting in Israel for this deal. We understand that, for example, on a Saturday night, a focal point for demonstrations since the war began, of course, in Tel Aviv on Hofstra Square, Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff was cheered loudly every time he mentioned the presidents as chants rang out of "Thank you, Trump." We'll have plenty more, of course, on this throughout the day.